Under a low, bruised sky, a lone rider came across the frost-hardened flats, her shawl flapping like a flag of weary courage. The winter wind nipped at her cheeks, reddening skin already weathered by half a century of cooking for strangers and raising children who never wrote back. The horse beneath her was thin and slow, but steady, like her. She followed the smoke of a single chimney ahead, rising in a crooked column from a cabin crouched against the hills. Folks in town said the man who lived there hadn't set foot past his own gate in 3 winters. Some said he was touched, others said haunted. She just said, "He's still breathing, so I'll find out why." When she reached the fence, he was there, hammer in hand, mending a post that had split under snow. 25, maybe a few more. Broad-shouldered, hair the color of dust, and eyes that looked as though they'd been staring too long at nothing. He paused mid-swing, the echo of metal against wood hanging in the air between them. "Ma'am," he said, nodding once. His voice was rough, as if unused. "You remember me?" she asked, dismounting slowly. Her knees cracked when her boots hit the ground. He studied her face a moment before shaking his head. "You knew my husband, John Sims. You traded horses 2 springs before he passed." "I did," he said quietly, his gaze falling back to the fence. She stepped closer, dust lifting from her skirt. "Then maybe you'll hear a widow's words without flinching." He didn't answer. Only the faint clatter of the hammer filled the silence. "My daughter just turned 20, son. How long will you live alone in that cabin?" The question slipped out soft, but it struck him like a blow. His shoulders tensed, the hammer stilled mid-air. He exhaled through his nose, long and heavy, and leaned against the post. The mountains loomed behind him, pale and endless, like a promise he'd stopped believing in. "Some men," he said finally, "ain't fit to be seen too close anymore." She looked at the cabin beyond him, windows clouded, roof patched with tin, a porch chair with one leg shorter than the rest. "Looks to me like it's not the world you're hiding from," she said. "It's yourself." He flinched but said nothing. A crow called from the pine above. The silence that followed was older than both of them. She untied a small bundle from her saddle, wrapped in cloth, still warm. "It's bread," she said. "Not charity. Just a mother's worry taking form." He took it hesitantly, his fingers brushing hers, hands calloused from work meeting hands roughened by age and labor of another kind. For a heartbeat, they both remembered the feel of kindness freely given. "You come all this way for that?" he asked. "For that," she said, "and to remind you that loneliness doesn't make you holy." He almost smiled, the faintest twitch at the corner of his mouth, but it vanished as quickly as it came. "You don't have to worry for me, ma'am. I've made peace with the quiet." "No one makes peace with the quiet," she replied. "They just stop fighting it." She turned then, pulling her shawl tighter. The wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of pine resin and cold ash. He watched her climb onto her horse. "Your daughter," he said suddenly, "does she need work?" "She needs purpose," the woman answered. "The kind a clean heart finds when it's given a chance." He nodded slowly, almost to himself. "I don't pay much." "She doesn't ask much," she said, and with that, she flicked the reins. The horse began its slow march back toward town, hooves sinking into thawing earth. He stood by the fence long after she was gone, the loaf of bread still in his hand, steam escaping through the cloth. The smell filled the cold air with a memory of kitchens and laughter and something he hadn't felt in years, home. The hammer slipped from his grasp, landing softly in the dirt. That night, the cabin glowed faintly from within. He set the bread on the table but couldn't bring himself to eat it. He only sat there, elbows on knees, staring at the crackling fire. Her words replayed in the flames. "How long will you live alone in that cabin?" Outside, snow began to fall, whispering against the roof. He rose, crossed the floorboards that groaned beneath his boots, and opened the door to the empty dark. His breath misted before him, and for the first time in years, he whispered into the wind, as though someone might hear. "Maybe not much longer." The morning she arrived, the frost had just begun to melt from the fence posts, and the wind carried the faint smell of smoke and thawing earth. He saw her before she saw him, a young woman on foot, coat too thin for the season, a skillet tied to her pack and a stubbornness in her step that didn't belong to someone lost. Her hair was pulled back in a way that looked done without a mirror, and her boots were dusted white from the long road out of town. He leaned his shoulder against the gate, hat low over his brow, and waited. When she reached him, she didn't ask permission to rest. She simply leaned her hand against the post and breathed like someone who had fought the wind and won. "You're the rancher," she said, not quite a question. Her voice carried the rasp of wood smoke and dry laughter, though her eyes held something fragile. "That's what they call me," he replied. "My mama sent me. Said you might need feeding. Said you'd gone too quiet for your own good." He didn't move, didn't smile. Only shifted the toothpick in his mouth. "She sent you all the way out here for that?" "She said the road needed another soul walking it," she answered, looking past him to the cabin. "You gonna let me in or let me freeze?" He hesitated. The door had not opened for anyone but him in 3 winters. He studied her, broad-shouldered, not delicate like the town girls who came to church in borrowed lace. There was something solid about her, something that looked like staying. "You can use the kitchen," he said finally. "If you burn the beans, you clean the pot." Her lips curved, not quite a smile, but close. "Fair deal, mister." Inside, the cabin smelled of dust and old ash. She set her bundle down, swept the hearth without being told, and began unpacking. Flour, a tin of salt, a skillet with a dent along one side. She worked quietly, her sleeves rolled to the elbow, humming a tune that didn't seem to know whether it was sad or brave. He pretended to fix a hinge just to stay near enough to hear it. "You live alone," she said at last, not looking up. "Easier that way." She chuckled under her breath. "Easier don't always mean better." He had no reply. Her words sank into the cracks of the place, filling spaces silence had claimed. By sunset, the smell of cornbread filled the cabin. She placed a plate on the table and poured 2 mugs of coffee. He stayed by the doorway, arms folded. "I eat outside," he said. "Suit yourself." She sat and ate without apology, though he noticed her eyes flick once toward the door as if she half expected him to change his mind. When he didn't, she quietly filled another plate, set it by the threshold, and left it there. Later, after she'd banked the fire and gone to the small cot he'd cleared for her, he stepped inside again. The plate was still warm, steam curling up from the bread. He sat on the floorboards beside it and ate slowly, as though tasting memory. The next morning, she was up before dawn, already kneading dough. He watched her through the open doorway. "You don't talk much," she said. "Not much worth saying," he answered. "Then listen," she replied simply. "Some folks need that more." He watched her hands, how sure they were even when trembling faintly with cold. She wasn't here out of pity, he could tell that now. She moved like someone who'd been sent to mend something she didn't yet understand. That evening, a gust of wind pushed open the door as they ate. He rose to close it, but she was faster, pressing it shut with her back, laughing softly. The sound startled him. It had been so long since laughter had lived in those walls. He turned away quickly, pretending to stir the fire. After she retired, he stepped onto the porch. The stars were sharp and cold. He thought of the woman who'd ridden out days before and her question, "How long will you live alone in that cabin?" Behind him, he heard movement, the creak of floorboards, then the quiet scrape of a chair being pulled closer to the table. He turned to see her setting another plate beside his, this time without a word. She didn't look at him, only said softly, "If you're gonna eat outside again, at least take your coat." He didn't answer. But when morning came, both plates were clean. By the 3rd week, the town had begun to whisper. The girl at the rancher's cabin, too young to be a widow, too old to be a fool, had become the favorite subject of women shelling peas and men lingering by the general store stove. "She's feeding him," someone said. "Feeding him and what else?" Another added with a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. Even the preacher's wife, who rarely spoke ill, muttered that no good came from a woman living under a lonely man's roof. The words rode the wind like ash and found their way to her ears the next time she went to town for flour. She kept her chin high, but her hands trembled when she paid the storekeeper. Behind her, The laughter pricked sharper than the cold. Back at the ranch, the silence felt different now, watchful, heavy. She baked anyway, kneading her worry into the dough. The rancher noticed. He always did, though he never said so. That evening, as she stood at the sink, he said quietly, "They talking?" She froze, then nodded once. He chewed the inside of his cheek. "Let 'em," he said. "They got mouths. We got work." She wanted to believe him, but her voice came out thin. "It's not your name they drag through the dirt." He looked at her then, really looked, and said, "Ain't the first time they've done worse to mine." The next day, a figure appeared at the gate. Reverend Collins, Bible under arm, hat pressed low against the wind. His voice was mild, but his eyes held questions sharper than kindness. The good book says, "Better a dinner of herbs where love is, than a stalled ox and hatred therewith." He smiled gently. "The town worries for you both." She wiped her hands on her apron and met his gaze. "Then tell the town I'm serving herbs till he learns to eat beside me." The preacher's lips twitched, half amused, half troubled. "You've got your mother's fire," he said, tipping his hat before turning back toward the road. That night, the rancher found her outside, chopping wood under the moonlight. "Fire's near out," she said before he could ask. "Best keep it alive." The rhythm of her axe bit into the still air. He stepped closer, wordless, and took the handle from her hands. "Go in," he said. "You'll freeze." She wanted to argue, but something in his voice, soft, not commanding, made her obey. Inside, she lit the lantern and watched through the window as he swung the axe, his breath clouding the night. For the first time, she noticed the tremor in his hands when he thought no one was watching. The following evening, the world came alight. Lightning split the sky, a jagged wound across the clouds. The storm hit fast, fierce. Thunder cracked against the hills, and the smell of rain was soon drowned by something darker, smoke. She burst from the cabin to see the barn roof blazing orange. The horses screamed inside, and the wind howled like a thing alive. The rancher was already running, bucket in hand. "Stay back!" he shouted, but she didn't listen. Grabbing a blanket, she soaked it in the trough and dashed toward the doors. Sparks bit her arms, singed her skirt. He caught her by the shoulders, dragging her back, shouting over the roar. "You'll burn yourself, damn it." "I won't watch them die," she cried, wrenching free. Together they forced the gate open, releasing the terrified animals into the rain. Flames licked their sleeves, their faces blackened with soot. When at last the barn collapsed, both stood soaked and shaking, the storm easing into a cold drizzle. Their eyes met, wild, breathless, unguarded. "You don't owe me kindness," he said hoarsely, water dripping from his hat brim. "It ain't debt," she whispered. "It's supper." For a long moment, neither moved. Only the rain spoke, hissing softly over the smoldering ruin. He reached out then, almost without knowing why, and brushed the ash from her cheek with his thumb. She closed her eyes, trembling, not from cold this time. When they returned to the cabin, smoke clung to their clothes, to their hair, to the silence between them. She lit a single candle, its glow trembling across the room. "Town'll see that light," he murmured. "Let 'em," she said. "They'll know we're alive." He stared at her, that small flame dancing between them, and felt something shift deep inside, something that had slept too long. Outside, the rain turned to mist, and from the road below, the cabin looked alive for the first time in years, one fragile light flickering against the dark. Winter softened into a muddy spring, and with it came a rhythm neither of them spoke about. Morning smoke rose early from the chimney, and the cabin no longer echoed hollow when footsteps crossed the floor. He mended fences and tended horses, while she baked, scrubbed, and sang under her breath, songs without words, made only of breath and memory. Sometimes he would pause in the doorway, just listening. It was strange how easily the human heart could forget its hunger until a sound reminded it of what it once craved. At night, they ate by lantern light, quiet but companionable. He'd begun taking his meals at the table, no longer on the porch. She didn't mention it, though her eyes softened every time his fork scraped the same plate as hers. "Coffee's strong tonight," he'd say, pretending it was the bitterness that made his voice rough. "You're getting used to taste again," she'd reply, pretending not to see the grief flicker across his face when she said again. One evening, after a day of rain that turned the pastures to silver, a letter came. The handwriting was shaky, the ink thin. She opened it by the hearth while he read the newspaper beside her. As she reached the second line, her breath caught. "It's Mama," she whispered. "She's taken ill." The letter trembled in her hand. He folded the paper, eyes searching hers. "You'll want to go," he said simply. "My horse is yours." She shook her head. "It's 3 days' ride in this weather. She'd tell me to stay." Her voice cracked, and she pressed her lips together hard. He stood then, awkwardly, like a man trying to comfort a wild thing without scaring it off. "You've done right by me," he said. "She'd be proud." The words made her eyes shine with tears she didn't let fall. "If I leave," she whispered, "who'll cook for you?" His answer was quiet, almost reverent. "You already have, every night since you came." That night, she couldn't sleep. She rose before dawn, moving softly through the cabin, the floorboards creaking like sighs. He found her outside, shawl drawn tight, face turned toward the paling sky. "Can't rest?" he asked. She shook her head. When Mama used to bake, she'd hum the same tune every time she was happy. "I thought I'd forgotten it till I heard myself humming it here." He smiled faintly. Maybe the heart remembers what the head forgets. As the sun broke over the hills, the world gleamed wet and new. The ranch smelled of damp hay and fresh wood smoke. She returned inside to start breakfast, but he lingered outside, staring toward the mountains. When he came back in, he washed his hands and, without a word, sat at the table. She bowed her head. "You don't have to," she began, but he interrupted softly. "Show me how." She blinked. "How to what?" "Say grace again." She folded her hands, and he mirrored her. Her voice was low and steady. "Lord, for this food and for the hands that made it, we give thanks." He hesitated before repeating it, his tone rough, uncertain. But when he finished, she looked up and smiled, the kind that didn't reach her lips, only her eyes. Days slipped by quietly. He began fixing things he had ignored for years. The broken shutter, the sagging porch rail, the wind chime that had fallen silent long ago. One evening, she found him on the porch, holding the old chime, stringing it back together with careful hands. "Didn't think you kept that," she said softly. "Some things you don't throw away," he murmured, "even when they stop singing." As dusk deepened, she baked another loaf of bread, setting it by the open window to cool. The smell drifted out across the field, mingling with pine and dusk. He stood at the doorway, hat in hand, watching her move in the flickering light. The sight stirred something deep in him, an ache that wasn't sorrow this time, but recognition. When the first star appeared, she stepped outside beside him. The repaired wind chime hung above the porch again, trembling faintly in the breeze. "Sounds different," she said. "Maybe the wind's just kinder tonight." He turned to her, his voice quiet but certain. "No. I think it's just got something worth singing for again." Inside, the bread cooled beside an untouched second plate. From the road, a rider's silhouette emerged, fast, urgent, silhouetted against the fading sky. He frowned, stepping forward. She followed his gaze, her hand instinctively brushing against his arm. The hoofbeats slowed at the gate, and a voice called through the dusk, strained but clear, "Message from town. Your mother, ma'am. She's asking for you." The first warmth of spring rose with smoke that wasn't from fire, but from bread. Thick, fragrant, human. The town noticed before noon. From the ridge, one could see it coiling from the rancher's chimney, steady, proud, like a flag raised after surrender. A few men at the blacksmith shop stopped to stare. "Didn't think that cabin was still lived in," one said. Another spat into the dust. "Guess he ain't as dead inside as we thought." By afternoon, half the town had found a reason to pass the road leading there. They saw the gate open wide, horses grazing calm, and the woman's dress moving in and out of the doorway like sunlight flickering through clouds. Inside, the smell of stew mingled with the tang of pine. She stirred the pot with a wooden spoon, sleeves rolled high, humming the same tune she once hummed when she thought no one heard. The rancher entered from the porch, carrying split wood on his shoulder. "Town's talkin'," he said simply. "They been talkin'," she replied, ladling soup into a tin bowl. "Let 'em tire their tongues." He leaned the wood by the hearth and looked around the room. The clean shelves, the fixed shutters, the repaired wind chimes swaying by the window. "Didn't think a place could remember how to breathe," he said quietly. "You didn't give it a chance before," she answered, half smiling. Before they could sit, a knock sounded. When he opened the door, the preacher stood there again, hat in hand, his horse steaming behind him. "Heard you were cooking," the preacher said, smiling faintly. "Thought maybe a wanderer could trade a prayer for a bowl." The girl laughed softly. "You bring both the prayer and the appetite, Reverend. I'll supply the mercy." Soon the table filled, ranch hands passing through, a widow from town, even 2 hungry children who had followed the preacher's wagon. No one had planned it. It just happened the way some blessings do, quietly, without permission. The rancher fetched more chairs from the barn, wiping dust with his sleeve. When one boy hesitated to eat, the rancher knelt beside him and said, "Food don't ask where you came from, son. It just waits to be shared." The child nodded and began to eat. When dusk settled, laughter rose from the cabin like music. The preacher leaned back and quoted softly, "Where 2 or 3 are gathered together in his name," and the girl finished, "There's warmth enough for all." Even the rancher smiled then, small, untrained, but real. Outside, lanterns glowed through the windows. From the ridge, townsfolk saw the lights and the drifting smoke, and something in them quieted. Maybe it wasn't scandal after all. Maybe it was grace. Later, when the guests had gone, the rancher stood at the doorway watching her wash the dishes. "You turned this house into something I almost don't recognize," he said. "Then don't call it a house," she replied. "Call it what it's become." He looked at her long, the candlelight trembling between them. "Ain't got a name for that yet." "Maybe it doesn't need one," she said, drying her hands on her apron. "Some things are better just lived." The silence that followed was soft, almost reverent. Then, from outside, a faint sound carried through the dusk, hoofbeats, slow and uneven. She stepped to the window and froze. A wagon approached, and at its front sat a figure she knew even from a distance. "Mama," she whispered. By the time they reached the yard, the older woman was weak but smiling, her shawl drawn tight. "Told you I'd find you again," she said, voice thin but warm. The rancher lifted her gently from the wagon, guiding her inside. The mother's eyes swept the room, the warmth, the plates, the smell of bread. "So this is where the smoke comes from," she said. "I thought maybe the good Lord was baking for once." The daughter laughed through tears, helping her to a chair. The rancher brought a cup of broth and placed it in the mother's hands. "You're a quiet man," she said, studying him. "But I see what you build when you don't talk." He bowed his head slightly. "Didn't build it alone." The mother's gaze softened, turning toward her daughter. "No one ever does, son." Night deepened. After she'd fallen asleep near the fire, the daughter draped a quilt over her and whispered, "Thank you." He shook his head. "Don't thank me. This," he gestured to the glowing room, the gentle breath of the wind chime, "this is yours as much as mine." She looked at him, truly looked, the way a person does when they finally understand the cost of someone's silence. "You kept the world out," she said softly, "but you never locked the door." He smiled faintly. "Didn't know I was waiting for someone brave enough to open it." Outside, the moon climbed higher, silvering the fields. From town, folks could still see the thin trail of smoke, steady and unbroken. Some said the rancher had found a wife. Others said it was just good souls doing what needed doing. But those who'd been close enough to hear the laughter that night, to smell the bread and see the light, swore that something sacred had risen with the smoke. Inside the cabin, he repaired the wind chime once more, adding one last small bell that she had found in her mother's bundle. When it rang, faint and bright, both turned toward it instinctively. The sound lingered, shimmering in the stillness. "It sounds like home," she whispered. He met her gaze, his voice low but steady. "No," he said. "It is home." Which city are you watching our video from? Please leave a comment. Please subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you.